Hello, everyone. Welcome to Knowledge Line. This is episode 3, part 1, and we shall today be considering a very important topic that impacts our everyday lives. We will be considering the topic promises. And in this very today's edition, we shall be looking at what is promise. Also, we shall be looking at the importance of promise. We shall as well be considering why do we need promises. We will be looking at why do people make promises they cannot keep. Also, we shall be considering why do people make promises they do not intend to keep. Also, in today's episode, we shall be looking at how can we know a lying promise. First of all, we might be attempting to give a definition of what a lying promise is. And also, we shall be looking at who is likely to make a lying promise. We shall also, if time permits us today, we will be looking at what is a failed promise. Also, we shall be looking at, is every failed promise a lying promise? How is promise different from contract? We shall as well be considering. And then we will be looking at, can we sue for a failed promise? I mean, can you take someone to court because of a failed promise? We as well will be looking at what impact or consequence do failed promise have on both promisee and the promiser. Then we shall be as well considering why is unfulfilled promise very painful. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I welcome you to Knowledge Line, and I enjoin you all to please sit back, relax, as we go into this very all-important journey that impacts our daily living. What is a promise? As I did said earlier on, we will be looking at these very topics one after the other, and if time permits us, we're going to be considering, I think, more than even 13 different points that we raised in this place while we're considering promises. So we probably might not be able to cover everything today, but then if we do not cover everything today, we will be continuing the topic or the conversation from the next edition. And then, but today, let's make some attempt at looking at some of these things. What is promise, first of all? Promise is defined as a declaration or the assurance that one will do something or that a particular thing will happen. The qualifying word of importance here is will. By the definition of promise, that someone will do something or that something will happen. So the qualifying word we shall be looking at is that word, the key word, will. It signifies absolutism. That means that it is certain, it is basic, and it is unambiguous. So, should we make promise then to be binding? This will take us straight to our second consideration. What is the importance of promise after all? Is promise necessary? Why do we make promise? Seeing then that promise is itself sacred, why do people treat promise like something very inconsequential? Do you not realize that when you make a promise, you have created a sacred bond by recognizing the humanity of the other person, the promisee, by raising his stroke her expectation? You raise hopes. You have lit the fire of expectation in that person. By so doing, you have achieved what you set out to achieve. or accomplish. That is making yourself a solution, the redeemer of a lost hope. That is exactly what you set out to do. To place yourself in a situation where you are seen as the solution to a need. So, in that instant, you are a rescuer to the lost hope, the solver of a hopeless situation, the redeemer of a lost glory, honor, or integrity. So much is on the weight of a promise. Love, admiration, health and well-being, that is peace of mind. Everything is hinged on just that very particular statement that maybe you knowingly or unknowingly, in quote, gave out to someone, and then so much is hanging on it. But then why do we treat it as if it's unimportant? It doesn't matter. We have even blessings and curses. When, of course, it does not go well, at the end of the expectation, you fail to carry out what you had said you will do. Sometimes it doesn't actually end well. And so, oftentimes it could lead to mortality. We shall be covering most of these things when we are discussing what are the impact or consequences of failed promises. But now, let's examine, why do we need promise? Why do we need promise? The consideration should be, does society really need promise? In pursuit of the argument regarding the absolute nature of promise, Rao, 1995, specifically argued that the morality issue in promise is a practice rule. What does he mean by that? He believes that once a promise is made, it must be kept, because the expectation created makes the promise making nonsense. I'll go back to it again. He believes that once a promise is made, it must be kept, because the expectation created makes the promise making nonsense. In other words, Rao is advising we do not need promise in society, but once it is created, it must be fulfilled. And I totally agree. And in my opinion of promise as absolute, I do believe that the promisee has sufficient reasons, even if just for moral grounds, to hold the promisor to duty wherein expectations are clearly established. We shall have more time in subsequent conversations to explore this proposition. You can as well read the book, The Lies of an Honest Man, to find out more about all these issues and the topics that we are considering today. We shall, at the moment, now go to consider, why do people make promises they cannot keep? This is very important. We see it often. We see it every time. We see it now and then. It's like as if it doesn't matter. So why do people make promises they cannot keep? Well, promises you cannot keep and promises you do not intend to keep. We must emphasize this first of all. Promises you cannot keep and promises you do not intend to keep are completely two different things and could occur in, for complete different reasons. So we will be looking at these two distinct scenarios in more details. But now we will be looking at promise that you cannot keep. We have established here that promise is your expression to other person that you will do or will not do something, or that you make something to happen or not happen. So when you are honest, these expressions will become fulfilled promises in a way that is recognized by the promisee. But if you do not intend to or cannot keep the promise, it becomes an unfulfilled promise. Besides the intention not to keep the promise, which we are not considering now, there are several reasons a promise cannot be kept. So let's look at those reasons why a promise cannot be kept. Firstly, you do not have the ability to keep the promise. That's number one point. You do not have the ability to keep the promise. This particular reason is often ranked with not having the intention to keep the promise. Most people call it an act of what? Deceit, and it is often believed to be intentional. Yeah. Some people make promises they do not actually intend to keep, so it could fall into this category of not having the ability to keep it. But again, too, that is even more detail when we shall be more detailed when we go to considering why people make promises they do not intend to keep. That's a different thing from promises you cannot keep. The promises you cannot keep, there could be some very particular reasons why that can happen, and which is what we're treating now. And the first consideration is that you do not have the ability to keep that promise when it was being made. You may or may not know it. It's left with you. So, but ability not to be able to keep the promise is number one. Then again, too, the promise may have been made based on hope. Well, sympathizers to this argument will point out that some promises are made with the hope of something in the future they are expecting to be the basis, and the hope to, and of course, they hope to be exonerated when it fails. Well, the problem with this argument is that it is hard not to find this honesty and non-intention to deceive in this particular case. Yeah, I repeat that again. The problem with this argument is that it is hard not to find dishonesty and non-intention to deceive in this particular case. An old English adage advises people. It says, sew your coat according to your size. You're making a promise to someone based on hope, something you don't already have, and you're hoping to get, and based on that, you're giving a promise. That is flawed. That is problematic. And it should not be happening because it is fraught with danger. We move on from there to look at another very important reason people make promises they cannot keep. Ego, the work of ego. Yes, most people, ignorant or unmindful of the dangers of failed promises, out of sheer ego and the desire to impress, make promises they do not have the ability to fulfill and therefore cannot keep. It is also difficult not to find intentional untruth, which is the core characteristics of lying promise in this type of promise making. I'll repeat that again. It is also difficult not to find intentional untruth, which is the core characteristics of lying promise in this type of promise making. You can find these scenarios mostly at social functions like fundraising, marriage to wedding ceremonies, book launchings, etc., etc. The fourth reason people make promises they cannot keep might be related to unforeseen circumstances. Now, in this particular point, or at this particular, with this particular consideration, I really feel I have utmost sympathy for people in this category who genuinely will fulfill their promise, but for an unforeseen circumstance or emergency that impacts the ability to fulfill that very promise. So I get it. I completely get it. There are incidences, unfortunately, for some people who had originally good intention to fulfilling a promise, but suddenly something could happen that could impact on their ability to fulfill that promise. So I get it. Yes, a situation like that could happen. But then again, the problem with this is that where this emergency or unforeseen circumstance is not something that can be seen or known or can be explained or communicated to the promisee, the outcome to the promise has same impact with every other failed promise. That impact is that every failed promise is painful. I'll go back to it again to what I said. The problem with this particular kind of situation is that where this emergency or unforeseen circumstances is not something that can be communicated or seen or explained or known to the promisee, the outcome of the promise has same impact. That is, the outcome of the failed promise has same impact with like every other failed promise. That impact is that every failed promise is very painful. But why is unfulfilled promise very painful, we might ask? Before we go to discussing the impact of the consequences of unfulfilled promise, let's first establish the fact why unfulfilled promise is very painful. This will help us appreciate the importance of promise. Yes, if we can establish the fact why unfulfilled promise is very painful, then we can begin to understand the importance of promise. It is argued by most philosophers that unfulfilled promise is very painful because it is associated with trust. It's been argued that why unfulfilled promise is very painful by some philosophers is that unfulfilled promise is associated with trust. That's why it's painful. A look at the meaning of that word, trust, that word, trust, will show you the key to why unfulfilled promise is very painful. Yes, if we look at the dictionary definition of the meaning of that particular word, trust, then you begin to understand why unfulfilled promise is very painful. Now, let's have a look at it. Trust is defined as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. Now, look at it again. It is defined as a firm belief in the reliability, a firm belief in the reliability of the truth or ability of someone or something. Oh my God. Go back to it again and think about it. It is defined as a firm belief of reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. Do you now realize why someone who has a firm belief, someone who is relying on what you said as truth? Take it back again. Let it sink a little bit deeper. By the time you begin to realize that what you say you will do, that someone has a firm belief and relies on it as true, with the confidence you have the ability to deliver. Not only is the person relying on what you said as truth, but he or she has the confidence that you have the ability to deliver, and that is that you have the ability to fulfill that promise. It will certainly be very painful when you fail to fulfill that promise. Of course. Wouldn't it be? It certainly will be painful, very painful. That is why unfulfilled promise is very painful, because it is associated with trust. Promise is not a light matter as people take it to be, or as people might consider it to be. Holmes, in his treatise of human nature, describes the power of promise as one of the most mysterious and incomprehensible operations that can ever be imagined. Whom described the power of promise as one of the most mysterious and incomprehensible operations that can ever be imagined. He argued it can be compared to transubstantiation. Theologians will comprehend this more. And he argued further, it is like a holy order where a certain form of words in line with a certain intention can change the entirety of the nature of an object, even of a human nature. Let's take it back again. His argument is that it can be compared to substantiation. I did say earlier on that theologians will best understand this better. Of course, we're trying to compare this like when you go for Holy Communion. As Christians, those of us that have Christian faith, you go for Holy Communion and you're presented with bread and wine. You believe that what you're taking in, you have the firm belief that what you're taking in, that bread is the body of Christ and the wine is the blood, so that you're taking both the blood and the body, representing the fullness of Christ in you. That is the importance of promise. That is the power of promise. Someone believing, someone with a firm belief that you have the ability and that what you said to him or her is the truth, and that you have the ability to deliver, to fulfill what you said you will do. He calls it an holy order, where a certain form of word in line with a certain intention can change the entirety of the nature of an object, even of a human nature. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall, in our next discussion, still on episode 3, promise, be looking at promises you do not intend to keep. Don't forget, earlier on we discussed promises you cannot keep. And I did say that there are two different things entirely, completely, with two different results and probably consequences. Promises you do not intend to keep and promises you cannot keep. Oftentimes, what is very difficult to see is the promise people do not intend to keep, because that is only known to the promisor who gave that promise, because only he or she will know whether he or she actually intended to keep that promise. So there are two different things, and we shall be considering in our next episode, in our next conversation, in this particular episode, the promises people do not intend to keep. And we shall be looking at the characteristics of the people who make promises they do not intend to keep. I will not want to jump the gun, but the number one kind of people, the number one set of people in this category are politicians. We're going to be taking scenarios, instances, occasions, events, happenstances, and many other things. We shall be considering most of these things in our next conversation, in this episode 3, when we meet next time. And we will start with the promises people do not intend to keep. And we will be looking at not only the characteristics of the people who make such promises, but the consequences, the impact of such promises. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned on Knowledge Line as we continue this journey in our next conversation. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for joining us. You can follow me on Facebook. You can as well link up with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and on YouTube. Or you can write to me via my email handle, tokonma.knowledgeline@gmail.com. The email again is tokonma@knowledgeline@gmail.com. Sorry, once again, the email is tokonma.knowledgeline@gmail.com. tokonma.knowledgeline@gmail.com. If you have any queries on any of these topics we have discussed, feel free to write to me via my email handle. You can also purchase a copy of the book, The Lives of Honest Men, for more understanding of these very topics and the things we have discussed today and the things we shall be discussing in our subsequent conversations in this very topic. So you can as well lay hands on a copy of the book, The Lives of the Honest Man. That was one of my books that was written in the year 2017. And The Lives of the Honest Man was published in the year 2015. So you can find more of these very conversations we've just had today in that book. And I enjoin you all to please get a copy and find out more on what promises and many other things mean to you in that very book. As well, you can place the order via Issue Property Services. You can, purchase a copy by, paying to the account number that is on screen at the moment now. So you can buy a copy, including postage for a package and postage for £9 a copy. And then we look forward to seeing you again on Knowledge Line in a coming conversation for next week. Thank you and goodbye.